The sun was setting over the wide Texas plains when the sound of horses thundered through the dry grass. Smoke rose in the distance and the cries of people echoed across the valley. Eleanor Briggs clutched her little brother's hand as her family's small wooden cabin trembled under the force of attack. The Comanche warriors came swift as the wind, faces painted, voices fierce. In moments, the peace of her world was gone. Her father shouted for everyone to hide, but before she could move, the door crashed open. A tall warrior stood in the doorway, eyes like burning coal. His presence filled the room. He was the Comanche king, Ironhawk, known across the frontier as the leader of the strongest band in the plains. He looked at Eleanor for a long moment, then spoke in a deep, cold voice, "You are now my slave." The words felt like ice pressing against her heart. Her family tried to fight, but it was useless. Within minutes, the homestead was in flames, her father wounded and Eleanor taken away with the warriors. As the horses galloped into the night, she could still hear her mother's voice fading behind her. Days passed as they traveled across endless grasslands. The nights were cold and the stars above seemed endless. Eleanor rode with her hands tied, silent tears drying on her face. She didn't understand their language, but she understood the tone. She was a prisoner in a world far different from her own. When they finally reached the Comanche camp, she was pulled from her horse and brought before Ironhawk again. His tent was large, decorated with buffalo hides and feathers. He looked powerful, almost like a figure carved from stone. He studied her quietly and said something to his men. They left her standing there, trembling, unsure if she would live or die. Ironhawk did not harm her, but his command was final. She was made to carry water, clean weapons, and tend fires. The other women watched her with cold eyes. Some pitied her, others avoided her completely. Eleanor had never felt so alone. She prayed every night, hoping someone would come for her. But the prairie stretched too wide and too wild for any rescue to find her. As days turned into weeks, Eleanor began to notice that not everyone in the tribe was cruel. There were children who played with stones and laughed as they chased dogs through the camp. There were elders who told stories by the fire about bravery and spirits that watched over them. The Comanche were fierce, but they also had families, hopes, and fears just like her people. One evening, as she struggled to carry a heavy pot of water, she stumbled. The pot slipped and shattered, spilling across the ground. The guard beside her raised his hand to strike, but before he could, another man stepped in. He caught the guard's arm and spoke sharply in their language. The guard lowered his hand and walked away, angry. The man who had stopped him turned to Eleanor. He was young, tall, and calm. His name was Talon. He looked at her with a kind of quiet concern that surprised her. He didn't speak English, but his eyes said enough. He picked up the broken pieces of the pot, placed them aside, and gave her a smaller one to use. From that day, Talon seemed to watch out for her. When the camp shared food, she sometimes found an extra piece of bread left near her tent. When she was too tired to walk, he slowed his horse so she could keep up. She didn't understand why he cared, but she began to feel a faint spark of safety when he was near. Eleanor learned that Talon was different from the others. He didn't shout or boast. He was respected among the warriors, but often stayed silent. She once overheard some of the women whispering that Talon had lost his brother in a raid and no longer believed in endless fighting. That made her wonder if he saw her pain and recognized it as his own. One cold night, Eleanor sat alone near the edge of the camp. The moon was full and the firelight flickered across her face. Talon approached quietly, carrying a small blanket. He placed it beside her and motioned for her to take it. She hesitated, unsure if it was a trick, but his expression was gentle, so she accepted. He sat across from her, staring into the flames. For the first time, she saw not an enemy, but a man burdened with choices. Days passed and rumors began to spread through the camp. Some of the warriors noticed how Talon often went near the prisoner's tent. Ironhawk's advisors whispered in his ear, telling him the young warrior was growing soft. Ironhawk's pride was as fierce as his power. One morning his voice echoed across the camp as he made an announcement. "No one," he said, "will touch what belongs to me. Any man who forgets this will face fire." The meaning was clear. The warning was for Talon. Eleanor felt fear rise in her chest. She didn't want Talon to get hurt because of her. That evening she tried to avoid him, but he came anyway, bringing her food and a small flask of water. She shook her head, trying to tell him to stay away, but he only smiled slightly and said softly, "You, safe." His English was broken, but his meaning was clear. The next few days were tense. Ironhawk began preparing his warriors for another raid. The camp buzzed with activity, horses being brushed, weapons sharpened. Eleanor overheard two men saying she would be taken north soon, possibly sold or punished. Panic filled her heart. She thought of her home, her family, her lost freedom. That night she sat by the fire, watching the shadows move like ghosts. Talon approached again, his face serious. He crouched beside her and whispered, "Tomorrow." "You go," she looked at him confused. "Go where?" she asked. He pressed a finger to his lips. "Home." Her eyes widened as she realized what he meant. He was going to help her escape. She shook her head, terrified. "They'll kill you," she whispered. He only said, "I know." When darkness fell completely, the camp grew quiet. Talon moved through the shadows like a hunter. He untied two horses from the corral, leading them silently to where Eleanor waited. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared it would give them away. Talon cut the ropes from her wrists and handed her the reins. For a moment, their eyes met. There were no words, only trust. They climbed onto the horses and rode into the black night. The wind tore through Eleanor's hair, and tears filled her eyes as the campfires faded behind them. She didn't look back. Every hoofbeat felt like freedom, every breath like a promise. But deep inside, she knew the danger was only beginning. The Comanche king would not let them go easily. The night air was cold as Eleanor and Talon rode through the open plains. The moon hid behind thick clouds, and the only sound was the beating of horse hooves against dry ground. Every gust of wind carried a whisper of fear. Eleanor gripped the reins tightly, her heart racing faster than the horses. She didn't know where they were going, only that they had to keep moving. Behind them, far away in the distance, a dog barked, followed by a shout. The camp had discovered their escape. Talon looked back, eyes sharp, then leaned forward and urged the horses to go faster. "Right," he said in his low, steady voice. Eleanor nodded, not daring to speak. They rode for hours through grass that brushed against their legs and across small streams that glimmered under the faint moonlight. Eleanor's hands were raw from holding the reins, and her body ached from fear and exhaustion, but she didn't stop. The thought of freedom kept her alive. As dawn began to break, Talon slowed the horses near a rocky ridge. He dismounted and helped Eleanor down. Both were trembling from the cold. He led the horses behind some large boulders and tied them quietly. Then he pointed toward the east. "River," he said. "You cross. Safe." His English was still broken, but his meaning was clear. They were heading toward a river that marked the border of Comanche territory. They sat in silence for a while. The rising sun painted the sky pink and gold, a color Eleanor had not seen since the day she was taken. For a brief moment, she felt hope bloom inside her, but Talon's expression was tense. He knew Ironhawk would not rest until he found them. Later that morning, they moved again, keeping close to the hills to stay hidden. Birds flew above them, and sometimes they saw deer in the distance. Eleanor tried to speak, to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. What could she say to a man who risked everything for her freedom? When they stopped to rest beside a small stream, she finally found her voice. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly. Talon didn't answer right away. He looked at the flowing water, his reflection trembling in it. "War too long," he said slowly. "Too many dead. You good, you no fight." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She understood. He was tired of pain, tired of killing. Helping her was his way of breaking free from that endless circle of violence. Before they could speak more, a sound broke the quiet, a distant cry carried by the wind. Talon froze, his eyes narrowing. He knew that sound. It was the war call of the Comanche. They had found their trail. "Go," he said sharply. He grabbed the horses and helped Eleanor mount. They rode again, this time faster, hearts pounding with every beat of the horses' hooves. The sound of pursuit grew louder. The warriors were closing in. The plains seemed endless. The wind tore at their clothes, dust filled the air, and the sun climbed high and hot. Talon's horse stumbled once, nearly throwing him, but he kept going. Eleanor could see the strain on his face. He was pushing himself beyond his limit. By afternoon, they reached the edge of a canyon. The river lay below, its water glittering faintly in the sunlight. Freedom was on the other side, but behind them came the thunder of hooves. Ironhawk and his warriors had arrived. Talon turned his horse sharply and faced the direction of the sound. Eleanor could see his expression harden. "You go," he said firmly. "No, no!" she cried. "I can't leave you." He looked at her with calm, steady eyes. "You must, you live." "I stay." Tears ran down her face, but she could see there was no time to argue. The warriors were already appearing on the ridge above, their horses dark against the sky. Talon pulled his bow from his back and handed her the reins of his second horse. "Ride across river," he said. "Don't look back." Eleanor's throat felt tight. She wanted to say thank you, to beg him to come with her, but her voice broke. Talon reached out and touched her hand lightly. "You strong," he whispered. Then he turned away to face his own people. Eleanor kicked her horse forward, tears blurring her vision. The animal jumped down the rocky slope and splashed into the river below. The cold water rose to her knees, but she pushed on, heart hammering. Behind her, she could hear shouts and the sound of weapons clashing. Talon fought like a man with nothing left to lose. He didn't attack to kill, but to delay, to protect. His arrows flew true, his movements fast and sure. Ironhawk rode at the front, fury in his eyes. "You betray your blood!" he shouted in his native tongue. Talon answered with silence, blocking his path again and again. The fight was fierce. Dust and water mixed with the noise of battle. Talon was outnumbered, but he didn't stop. Every moment he bought meant Eleanor was closer to freedom. Eleanor reached the other side of the river, breathless and shaking. She turned once, just for a moment, and saw Talon standing on the riverbank, surrounded by riders. Her heart twisted in pain. Then one of the horses reared, and she lost sight of him in the chaos. She rode until her body could no longer move. When the land finally changed from plains to forest, she collapsed from exhaustion. She didn't know how long she lay there before she heard voices, human voices speaking English. When she opened her eyes, she saw two men in worn uniforms kneeling beside her. They were scouts from a nearby outpost. One of them gave her water while the other asked where she had come from. Her lips trembled as she tried to explain. "The Comanche," she whispered, "a man. He helped me escape." The soldiers exchanged surprised looks. They took her to the outpost where she was cared for and given food and rest. But even as her body healed, her heart stayed heavy. Every night she dreamed of the river, the shouts and Talon's final words. Weeks later, when she was strong enough, Eleanor told her story to the officers. They listened in disbelief as she described the Comanche warrior who risked his life for her. Some thought she imagined it. Others said it was impossible. But she knew the truth. Years passed. The war between settlers and the tribes faded slowly, replaced by uneasy peace. Eleanor married, built a small home, and started a family. Yet sometimes when the wind swept across the plains, she would stop and listen, as if she could still hear the echo of hooves and the whisper of a brave man's voice. Old age softened her hair to silver and her memories into stories. Her grandchildren often gathered around her, asking her to tell the tale of the man who saved her life. Her eyes would fill with both sadness and gratitude as she began. "There was once a warrior," she would say softly, "who could have killed me but chose kindness instead. He was brave and his heart was pure. He showed me that courage isn't about fighting. It's about doing what is right, even when the whole world stands against you." Some said that Talon died that night at the river. Others believed he survived and wandered north, away from war, to live quietly in the hills. No one ever found proof, but Eleanor believed in her heart that he lived, that he became one with the land he loved so much. Sometimes she would walk to the river's edge, where the water still ran clear and cold, and whisper his name to the wind. The breeze would brush against her face as if answering back. In her final days, Eleanor wrote his story in a small journal so people would remember not the hate or the bloodshed, but the single act of courage that changed her life. And when her family found her words after she was gone, they made sure his name was not forgotten. To this day, the people in that valley still speak of the tale. They call him Talon of the Comanche, the warrior who defied his own king to save a stranger. His story lives on as a quiet reminder that even in a world divided by fear and difference, one act of compassion can outshine 1,000 battles. And somewhere, in the whisper of the wind over the Texas plains, it is said you can still hear the faint echo of hooves and a gentle voice saying, "You safe."